Jeff Bezos just soundly defeated Bernie Sanders. And no, I'm not talking about the future election of 2024. No, I'm talking about a huge win for Amazon over an alliance that was built by Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm Andrew Esquire, and this is The Legal Mindset. We help you gain an unfair advantage. Now, let's start out with this. I'm not a huge Jeff Bezos fanboy. I'm not gonna cry if Jeff Bezos loses any money or if Amazon takes a couple hits. That's not going to trouble me. I'm gonna sleep just fine at night. But Amazon is a huge company, and let's all admit it. We all use Amazon Prime. I love that 2-day shipping. And it would be horrible if that 2-day shipping became 3-day shipping or 4-day shipping or 2-week shipping because of union strikes. And that's what Amazon is really afraid of. Amazon is afraid that that fast delivery, that fast system from order to shipment will be slowed down. And how does that system work? It works through a series of warehouses throughout the United States. And this is exactly where Amazon has been criticized the most. These warehouse workers have been a huge subject of controversy for Amazon. Why? Well, because people talk about the bad conditions that they work in. They talk about low pay, they talk about no breaks, they talk about having to pee in bottles, all sorts of horrible things. Now, full disclosure, Amazon is under investigation by the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. That's the federal government agency that's in charge of businesses, labor unions, and general employee complaints. And they're investigating Amazon for several, apparently, unfair employment practices. So Amazon is under the knife. But despite all that, Amazon had a huge win against unions. Now, what was going on? The workers in a warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, wanted to form a union. At least some of them wanted to form a union. And in order to do that, you have to take a vote. You have to take a mail-in vote. Everybody needs to decide, hey, do we want to start a union here or not? So before we go anywhere, let's just talk about basics about what a union does. Well, a union generally is meant to help with collective bargaining. They're meant to come together and bring everybody together and say, hey, we're gonna approach this employer as a block. And because we approach as a block, not one-on-one, we have more power to negotiate wages. Because if they don't give us what we want, we'll just strike. We'll just not show up for work. And that's been historically the power of the union. They also do other things, like protect employees from termination. So when a company might go to terminate employees, they may consult the union. And oftentimes the union will say, hey, we'll pick who will get terminated. We'll decide who gets to leave. Now there's a problem with that, and we'll get back to it. And the last thing that unions do is political advocacy. Now that's a huge problem. So let's turn and see why unions might be problematic just looking at those three factors. So let's start with wages. So it sounds great that everybody would be able to have their wages go up, right? I mean, it sounds really cool if you're able to negotiate as a group for, let's say, $20 an hour, and otherwise, if you negotiated individually, you might have gotten 12. That sounds great. But what if you're a really highly motivated worker? What if you're just a great worker? You're way above average. You're not average, but you're above average. Well, a union might actually be keeping you down. Maybe you individually could have negotiated for $25 an hour. Maybe even more. So the high-performing employees, the productive employees, are sometimes punished under a union structure. And let's turn to termination. So termination protection is great for employees the union likes, and that's the key. If you're in with the union, and you might even think about it like the mob. If you've got the protection, they'll protect you, right? But let's say you're new. Let's say you just came there. Let's say you're not as tight with the union buddies, the union godfathers. Well, you're gonna be the one who's cut. And a lot of times when unions are asked about termination, they decide to keep the most senior employees, not necessarily the most skilled or motivated or talented or ones that produce the best results, but just the ones that have been there the longest for the pure reason of having sat their butt in the seat for longest. And that's not good for other employees or for the company. And let's turn to politics. I think that's the biggest problem. And that's what the courts have decided is a huge problem with unions. So one thing historically is that unions have supported political candidates, typically Democratic candidates. Now this has changed, especially with the Trump era, but let's just play this out. Let's say that you are a conservative employee. You generally follow conservative beliefs. That's your day-to-day. And all of a sudden you come into work and see the union posting Hillary 2024 posters. They're hyping for Hillary. And you say, what the heck? What's happening here? Well, they have the right to do that political advocacy. And that's one thing they've been doing. So a lot of employees have said, hey, I don't want my money to go towards those causes. Oh, did I forget to mention that? You have to pay to be in a union. And that's a massive con just in and of itself. So let's think about that. Imagine you walk into a job, you get there, your boss tells you, hey, you're paid $15 an hour. You go, sounds good. But all of a sudden, another guy walks in. He's the union boss. And he says, we got you that $15 an hour. Because of that, we're gonna take 2. Maybe we'll take 3. And that's the power of a union. And in some states, that's non-negotiable. They can take what's called an agency fee, even for people who don't join the union. And that's because the union can say, hey, every employee, regardless of whether they're in the union or outside of the union, benefits from union negotiations. That's why a lot of states, like Alabama, like our case with Amazon, passed right-to-work statutes. They said, hey, it's not fair that people are coming into a job and they're forced to pay these union dues. That's just unfair. We don't want to do that, especially when these organizations are political, where they're donating to political figures that not everybody wants to support. And that's a massive problem. So states like Alabama said, hey, right to work, you don't have to join a union if you don't want to. So that brings us back to Bessemer, Alabama. So Bernie Sanders led an alliance of other Democrats who were hyping this unionization of this Alabama warehouse. They wanted it for 2 reasons. First, it's in a right to work state. So they really wanted to get a big W in a southern state and show that they can unionize even within a southern state. But second, and perhaps more than that, is the effect it would have on Amazon. So yes, it's just one warehouse that would potentially unionize, but given how big Amazon is, that could start a domino effect where all of Amazon's warehouses could unionize. And that could be huge problems. Going back to what we talked about, strikes, work stoppages. I mean, anything could prevent your packages from showing up on time. Now, because of that, the workers got to vote. Hey, do we want to join this or do we not? And guess what? They voted by majority that they did not want to join the union. They did not want to have a union in that Amazon warehouse. And that's totally cool. That's their right. And perhaps they were thinking, hey, we don't want part of our pay to go towards those union bosses. We don't want it to go towards politics. We don't want it to go towards protecting senior workers. That's not good for us, and that's not good for the employer. That's not good for anybody. It's really a lose-lose in the Bessemer case. So it was a huge win for Amazon. Jeff Bezos can be really, really excited. Of course, he's still excited because big tech is taking over.